Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to our monthly Noahide Path with Rabbi Moshe Shulman. Today he is sharing on the Hasidic movement today, its current state. He'll be starting the Zoom meeting in about 5 minutes. I mean, they're in there chatting now. Many people are in there now. But we do want to encourage you to join via Zoom if you are truly interested, because it's an opportunity to ask one-on-one questions with the rabbi directly, and it's just great for growth, and people get to know other people that way. So if you've seen this link on our Facebook pages, I've shared it 116 times that have links to this specific Zoom meeting. So please come in. No trolls and no nobody horsing around. You'll be ejected pretty quick. Let's just jump right in and look at them chatting currently, and he'll be starting in the next couple minutes.
In Jewish law, there are, for if you have rabbis who are qualified, they will sometimes look at the same text and come up with a different answer. Okay? Now, I might say he's wrong, he might say I'm wrong, but if he's a qualified rabbi, meaning that he knows the material, like for example, Moshe Weiner, even when I disagree with him, he's absolutely qualified, because you can see from what he has, from his notes and how he does, that he knows the material. Okay? I might argue that he's misinterpreting a couple of texts, or misusing a text which shouldn't be used because of reason X, Y, Z, for example, which, whatever. But, that still doesn't mean that you as a Noahide, should decide on your own what it is. If it's somebody who's your rabbi, that's your rabbi, and you're supposed to follow. If he's wrong, it's his problem, not yours. Something about you, it's his problem, not yours. And it's very important to understand it, because one of the things about Judaism and what is the Torah life is that you really have people who are the authorities, and these are the authorities you're supposed to follow. And it's their responsibility to give you the correct answers, and it's their liability, say, if they give the wrong answer. Okay? So, for example, we're going to find out next time that it's actually prohibited for a Jew to teach certain things to a non-Jew. There's different views of it, but I'll give you the general view that when I get there, I have to explain the certain things that are going on and saying why people disagree, what they're disagreeing about. But so, for example, if a rabbi teaches you things, he's not allowed to teach you. Meaning you're not supposed to learn it, he's not allowed to teach you. Okay? It is essentially his sin, not yours, because he's your rabbi. Somebody that you look to as an authority, you believe him to be authority, and are doing that sincerely and honestly. So it's not your problem, it's actually his problem that he's teaching you things he shouldn't be teaching. Understand what I'm saying, Bob? That's really fundamental to Torah Judaism. It really is. That's how Jews get along with it. For example, the Chasidic, the Babish is different from other places, but we recognize that even though we may disagree with some of the things, it's a valid expression, and as such, if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. That's how Judaism works, as being more of we call it. I refer to it as a hetero-orthodoxy, meaning there's a fundamental orthodoxy underneath everything, but it's hetero in the fact that there's different ways of expressing that orthodoxy. And as long as you follow, as long as you follow your rabbi, the customs, however that works out to you, for Noahide would be basically following the rabbi speaking to. But for like me, the customs and community, whatever, as long as you are following it based on authorities, the people who have authority from the Torah, the knowledge of the Torah to be able to do it, then as far as you're concerned, you don't have to worry about it. Okay? So, and if you hear something from me, obviously, or you hear from another rabbi who seems to disagree, you can ask me why I disagree with that, or you can ask your rabbi why he disagrees with what I say. That's fine. That's very normal in Judaism. You'll see a lot of discussions where rabbis disagree about certain things. But I've sat with Rabbi Weiner before, and we've discussed certain things which I've disagreed with him, where I pointed out things that I thought in his text he misunderstood the Gemara, for example, and a few other things. But that's normal. That's the way. That's why Jewish people who know how to learn, usually do when they discuss it. They see something they think they discuss what the sources are and what they are, and how to interpret. So you'll see that here. And then, it shouldn't bother you if you see something that I disagree. You could ask your rabbi, why do you disagree with this person? If the person's Lubavitch, there's a very good chance he disagrees because the Lubavitch had ever said differently. Okay? He said, listen, I can't argue against that. Even though the poskim that I know may disagree with it, okay, whatever. He has the right to an opinion. He's an authority, so that's fine. You understand the concept. It's a very difficult concept for Christians to understand this. That actually Jews could strongly disagree with each other, and then accept the other person. The best example is there's a very strong disagreement as to when Shabbos begins and when Shabbos ends. Okay, there are those who start Shabbos earlier and end it earlier, and those like me who actually start Shabbos later and end it later. Okay, so according to them, I'm violating Shabbos because I started it late. According to me, they're violating Shabbos because they ended early. But we have no problem. I don't consider them as being people who are violating Shabbos. They're just following a particular view that I understand. It's just not the one that we do. As long as they're consistent, it's fine. And we can be friends and everything like that. We don't, it doesn't bother us. This is a concept I know for Christians have no concept of it, how people can actually feel, if I was to do like them and do forbidden Shabbos work at the time that they do it, which they're allowed to, I would actually be violating Shabbos. But for them, it's okay because they follow a certain view. I'm not going to get into all the different arguments where it goes back to in the Gemara Goinim and in the Rebit because this is complicated stuff. But that is part of Judaism. That was really what's Torah about. As long as you are following valid authorities, even if it's different with someone else, even if your authority says to the other person actually violating something very seriously, as long as your source is coming from somebody who's qualified, who knows the subject, really well, to talk about it, is fluent in the issues there, then it's you're following somebody that the Torah requires you to follow. You're following the system of the Torah. The system is much more important than the answers. In the Torah, that's a very important thing. Unlike in Christianity, the system, following the system, is more important than the answer that you get. We discussed this a little bit when we talked about the biblical basis of rabbinic authority, but that's a very important point to remember. As Noahides, that's totally different from Christianity. It's the system and the conclusions based on that system, which were much more important than exactly what you're doing. Okay? So, for example, if you're doing it because on your own you looked into something, you're not qualified to do it because it takes years of study. What I'm doing right now, reviewing the laws in Tractates and Hedron, I don't know any Noahide who's allowed to do it. And a lot of rabbis, a lot of Jewish people wouldn't be able to do it also, the type of learning I do right now, that I go very deeply into the Shonim Achronim, understanding with the arguments and witnesses, whatever it is, and coming to conclusions, seeing what conclusions later. And most of the people who teach Noahides don't do that either. But, Rabbi Weiner knows, and there's other people that I know who've done it also. So these are people who are eminently qualified, even if we might disagree on how they understand. We're going to talk about a response next time. We're talking about a specific response of the Rambam, which, if you read it correctly, disagrees with what a lot of people are teaching Noahides that the Rambam teaches. But whatever. That's neither here nor there. We'll go through it and we'll see what it is. And the most important thing is to remember that it's the system of getting to the answer more important than the answer what it is. Okay? If you follow the system correctly, you will not be considered liable for what you do. If anything, the worst case is if you did something wrong, it's considered unintentional, and the liability is the one of the teacher who was teaching you correctly. Very important to understand. This is totally different from Christianity. Okay? It's really the methodology. And this is, when we learn about the Tanakh, we'll see that that's very, very important. That's really what it's all about. Hey, Mike, how you doing? First time here? Let's see your face. I don't know if he has. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I am going to now start my recording from my side. So then we will actually start.
Recording in progress.
Okay, let's start now. This is the last session on our second unit, which is about Noahides and Rabbis, and this is the third in the subsection that we have here, dealing with the Chasidic movement. This particular one we're going to deal with today is dealing with the Chasidic movement today, what we see there today. We're going to talk about all kinds of different movements that are around now. Excuse me. And when we get finished tonight, you will have been introduced to 95+% of the Chasidim and the rabbis, the Rabbis that the Chasidim go to today. Okay? And you'll have a pretty good idea of the size of them and the relations amongst each other. Okay? Now, I just want to remind what we've done in the last two sessions. The first session, we talked about Hasidic groups in general, many of the differences in customs and stuff that belong in different groups, the views of modernity, and various different things in different groups. So we talked about, for example, on one end, you have Lubavitch, which embraces modernity, embraces the internet, whereas basically in other groups, it's much more against modernity, things like the internet and stuff like that. Okay. We also discussed that when we look at Hasidic groups that are existing today, we can basically divide them into four groups. There's the small groups which have under 100 families. This can be a small shul, which is just a Rebbe and his family, but not really any Hasidim of that Rebbe. They were Rebbes maybe in Europe, because remember, after World War II, most of Hasidic Judaism in Europe was wiped out. The communities we have today, except for those that were already in the land of Israel, really all built themselves up or rebuilt themselves up after the war. So there's a lot of small groups, people who are Rabbis who had the names of one of their ancestors, and they have a shul, a synagogue in that name, but they really don't have any Hasidim. And there's some groups that the Rebbe has like a few Hasidim, 10, 20, 30, 40, small, but under 100 is considered small. Okay. Then we have what we'd call the medium size, again, which are between 100 and 1,000 family. We're talking about families, not people, families. Okay. Large size is about 1,000 families, about 10,000. And there are a few that are what we call mega Hasidus, would have 10,000 plus families. Now that's going to be a moving number, because these groups that even they are that would be large today, within 20 years, because children grow up and marry, the average family size is somewhere around 7, and they have children and grandchildren. So, for example, for myself, at this time, I have somewhere between 15 and 20 grandchildren. And my oldest grandson just became engaged a couple of days ago. We'll mention him because when we talk about the Hasidic groups, I want to talk about my personal relationship with different groups, either through family or through my personal visiting them. So, I have 15 to 20 already grandchildren, and great-grandchildren will be starting. So if you could just think of what happens in one generation, 2 people end up 20 people, say, in a generation. So, okay. So with that type of growth, a group that could be in the medium become large within 20 years, unless they split up into smaller groups, which is happening also. And a group that is large can grow to the point that would be considered a mega, and a mega group becomes even bigger. So if I was to be giving this to say in 20 years, I would probably say a mega group is maybe 20, 30,000 families, and large would be like 2, 3, or 5,000 families, based on how the growth rates are. I mean, there's some yeshivas that each class has, over 100 boys. Just on the boys' school has over 100 boys in the boy classes. Okay, and many of them, like Stockman, has many more than that. So if you just look into the future, prognosticate the future, when all these boys get married and start having children, you have 100 boys. That's, each year you're adding 100 or so families in just this area itself, not including. So you get more and more, and you get larger and larger. So they get one. So I'm just giving you a snapshot of today, basically, to give you an idea of group sizes. Group sizes, by the way, does not tell you anything about the stature of the Rebbe themselves, their levels in spirituality. It just tells you how many people actually follow them. Okay, an interesting point to mention. I haven't mentioned this before, but many Rabbis who today are revered for their greatness did not have very many Hasidim. They may have had 20, 30, 40, 50, especially among the early Hasidim. It wasn't until Hasidus really spread, and especially in Poland proper, that you got an idea of Hasidim in the hundreds of thousands. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that because it comes up later on. We talk about certain groups, the size before the war. The war wiped out many Hasidic groups of very many sizes. So when I talk about the groups we're going to talk about, these are basically the ones that survived. And even some of those that survived, they survived at a much smaller size than they had been in Europe. Now, another point that I wanted to mention before we start is that when we talked about Hasidic history, we mentioned that in the middle of the 1700s, Poland was divided. It was divided in three. The western part went to Prussia, which Prussia is now Germany. Later on, Prussia took over the other German states, the German-speaking states, and they made the German Empire. Okay, that was Germany, and so Prussia is essentially Germany. The east was Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, Lithuania, that area, and also a large part of Poland proper. Warsaw was under Russia, although the Polish area in Russia is somewhat different, but we know that the rabbis and the Rabbis, Hasidim that lived in Russia, Ukraine, those types of areas, they had a certain, their way of running the Hasidic group was unique, usually for that area. We're going to have a little mention about that, okay, how it is, how they ran, how the Rabbis would be different and something. I will talk about that when I talk about today, those Hasidic groups that come from Russia. And then the south basically was taken over by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That's the areas of parts of Poland, Galicia, and Hungary. And they were in many ways different in the way the Rabbis interacted with the Hasidim and that. Now, there's another very, very big important difference is among the Hasidim that were in Russia, the Rabbis were just Rabbis, and there was a rabbi in the city who was not the Rebbe. The Rebbe chose out a rabbi. And also, it was less common for these Rebbes to lead the prayers in Russia. That was Russia, and Poland was basically followed that same thing. Whereas those Rebbes in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, whether it was in Galicia or in Hungary, or I think parts of Romania were also part of that. Most or many of the Rebbes were also the rabbi of the city. So, for example, my group, the rabbi was the Rebbe. Now it's changed a little bit, but the Rebbe was the rabbi of the city. And a number of these we're going to mention that actually was that way. And also, the Rebbes would lead the prayers on holidays. These are differences in customs between the groups. We're going to talk about when we talk about different groups. I'll mention this so you know that that's different. So, for example, we're going to talk about Lubavitch, and you'll see that Lubavitch is actually a very, very Russian type Hasidus. The interaction, the way the Rebbe interacts with his Hasidim is very much in the form of what we see in Russia. Whereas other groups, like the group that I belong into, which comes out of Tzans, is like it was there. The Rabbis were Talmid Chacham, there were rabbis also, and there were much more interaction with the Hasidim. We'll talk about that when we get to it. But before we start, you have to understand that where people came from, it had a very big influence as to actually the way today the different types of Hasidic groups do things. Now, we're going to start doing the groups. The way I'm going to do this is we're going to start first with the groups that trace themselves directly back to the Baal Shem Tov or his Talmidim. That means that the group itself goes directly back to either the Baal Shem Tov himself or somebody who was himself a Talmud, a student of the Baal Shem Tov. Okay? And there are a number of them that are very important today. So we'll go through them. We'll discuss a little bit about them, things that might make them a little unique, how they are based on where they came. Okay? So to give you a good idea. Again, the whole purpose of what we're doing today is what you see of Hasidim on the internet, for example, is predominantly Lubavitch, and you're going to find out Lubavitch is only a very small part of the whole Hasidic world that's around there. And it's worthwhile for Noahides to know what the Jewish world is like. Not just that little part of the Jewish world that you actually interact with, but what really is if you want to really see what the Jewish world is like, to understand what the general Hasidic world is. So like, if you came to New York, and you decide you wanted to walk into Satmar Beis Medrash, you should be aware of what you're running into, okay? Before you get frightened or anything like that, because it's going to be different, okay? As opposed to Lubavitch, if you went to 770, you walked into there would be probably no problem at all whatsoever, because these are different, okay? Now, the first group I want to deal with is Breslov. As I mentioned before, remember last time in the second group, we went through the first few generations of the Chasidic movement, how it spread from the Baal Shem Tov to the Rebit. Now Rebit sent people out to different areas, and how it evolved in the next generations into other areas and started to spread out, basically giving the foundation for all of the groups that we're going to talk about today. All of them, by the fourth generation, you can see where they come out. Even if they hadn't started by then, you can see where they come out from there. So, first one is Breslov. As I mentioned, the founder and only Rebbe for that group was Nachman Breslover. He was a great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. He grew up in the Baal Shem Tov's house. The Baal Shem Tov's house was like a meeting place for all the students of the Baal Shem Tov who lived into that time, and for many of them, and also, for a lot of different people who came to the city where Baal Shem Tov was buried in order to pray by the place where he's buried. So Nachman, probably more than any other Rebbe, was brought up in a area, in a place where he was constantly exposed to what the Baal Shem Tov taught. More than any other place, that's what it is. Now, when Reb Nachman died, he said that there would be no other Rebbe. So his main Talmud, a person named Nussen from Nimitov, he took over not as Rebbe, but you could probably call him a mishpia. He was a person who was disseminating the teachings from Reb Nachman. And until our present day, that's what happened. So there are a number of groups of mishpiyim, you can call them, in Breslov. They're not Rebbes, but they're mishpiyim. Some of them a little bit more like Rebbes, but basically that's what it is. And each one can trace his tradition of teachings from Reb Nachman back, all the way back to Reb Nussen, and eventually, obviously, to Reb Nachman. They all teach basically, it's only taught basically based on the teachings of Nachman, not from other things, but basically from that. So, like for today, there's in Yerushalayim, the one that I've met is a very, very, very important rabbi. So there's Yaakov Maya Shechter. I think he's 90 now. And he's the head of the Breslov Hasidim in Jerusalem. Okay, and there's other, Rabbi Kramer, there's a few other, I can't remember all the names because I personally am not a Breslover, but there's a number of those, and they all are basically the same in that every time they teach from Reb Nachman's works, and everything they teach is based on what Reb Nachman himself taught, not on anything else. They might look at other things as commentaries on Reb Nachman, but not as individual Hasidic works, as opposed to in other groups. Later Rabbis, they have their own Hasidic works themselves, or sort of like that. As is, my wife has a cousin who is not alive now, but in Muncie, he was the head of the shul, the Breslov shul there. I can't remember which Breslov he was under, but he was one of the particular groups that he followed, who has a tradition all the way back to Nachman. Now, there are a lot of people in Breslov today who don't belong to any of these. They just pick up Nachman's things and they read it and whatever, maybe some comments, and they consider themselves Breslov. That's really not what the Breslov derech has been all over the years, but there's a lot of people like that. So it makes it very hard to say how many Breslov or Hasidim there are in the world. I would assume that there's probably more than 1,000 Breslov families in the world. I think it's hard to say that there's less than that, but I believe that there are more than 1,000 Breslov families in the world with all of these different people. Okay, next one we want to deal with. Rebbe from Mezrich, his great-grandson was the Rebbe Yeshua from Rizhin. Now, the Rizhiner had a number of children who became Rebbes, but today there's really only two Rebbes who are descended from the Rizhiner who have any Hasidic group that is of any size. Okay, there's a bunch of smaller ones that are very small and not very significant as far as that's concerned, but there are two groups that are of a significant size. The first one is Beyond. That is definitely a large Hasidus. It's centered in Jerusalem. Beyond Rebbe is not my age. I think he's a little bit younger than me. He's somebody I have dealt with and spoken to and seen and whatever. Very, 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 very important in Chusha. Very, very, very. He's one of the Rebbes that I've met and seen that I'm very much impressed by his service of Hashem. And it's according to the tradition of Derech. The tradition of Derech was that the Rebbes were very much like kings, separated from their people. And that there was no real, it's not that you didn't interact with the Rebbe, but it wasn't really on as much of a personal basis. It's not like, you go into the Rebbe and you can sit, like, for example, my Rebbe's took over after his father-in-law, and his father-in-law took after his father. So his father, I would go on, we could sit and talk, I could talk 15, 20 minutes with him, or however amount of time he wanted to give me or wanted to want, and we would talk in a very personal, whether personal things, whether things that have to do with serving Hashem. So that's in Rizhin, it's very much. So, for example, in Rizhin, when they have a Tish, the Tish is when the Chassidim are together, the Rebbe is away and nobody sits next to him. The Rebbes pray separated, totally separated from everybody. There's no, it's made clear that he's totally separated. This is a Rebbe. Now, in all Rebbes, of course, have a place where they pray, but that kind of a separation, Chassidim don't get very close to it. Okay, here it's totally separated. When the Rabbi prays, he's totally separated. Okay, that again is the Russian Chassidus. That's the Russian way of doing things. Okay, the Rabbis were like that. It's not that they didn't, speak with the Chassidim, but they were like kings, royalty. They were above the people. The people, they didn't speak to them in that kind of way. For example, in my group is not that way. And when I go inside to speak to my Rebbe, because we were personal friends before we became Rebbe, we speak to each other in a very different way. Okay, it's more like speaking to a friend who, more like speaking to somebody who's a friend than, somebody who's like, totally away from things. Even though, when he became Rebbe, our relationship changed significantly because of that. But in Rizhin, it's just totally like that. And that's very common in the Russian Hasidus. Now, some of the Russian Hasidim, by the way, when they came to America, stuff like things sort of changed a little bit because they didn't do exactly the way it was. But vision of Rabbis were pretty much like that. So beyond is a large Hasidus. There's another one called Sadigur. The last Sadigur Rebbe died a number of years ago, I think 3 or 4 years ago. It's hard to remember. And he left a will which said that his second or third son should take over. And this son took over in Bnei Brak. But there was another son who became Rebbe and by himself and in Jerusalem. So there's two Rebbes, although really only the third son was the one that the father wanted to be it. As far as size, I believe that Sadigur is a medium size. I don't think they really have 1,000 families. I really don't think they do. Maybe the two of them together are closer to the 1,000 family line, but I really am not sure that they do. I don't think they do. Again, the Sadigur Rebbe in Bnei Brak, who I've seen, is very, very impressive. I've seen him. He's a young Rebbe. I think he's in his 30s now, but he has all the signs of somebody who is going to be a very, very great Rebbe, like his cousin, the Violating Rebbe, when he goes older. The Violating Rebbe, when he was young, was very, very similar with the Sadigur Rebbe is today. Very, very, it's very hard to explain somebody who you could feel the dynamism of. So that's beyond Sadigur. I would like to mention that my son in Israel, his wife is actually descended from Tish, so she's a cousin. My grandchildren are related to the beyond Sadigur Rabbis because of the relationship with Tish. Just mention these. There's a lot of people, by the way, who are related to these families because they're descended from Asian for other places. It's very common among Hasidim. A lot of Hasidim have ancestry back to Hasidic Rabbis. Okay, the next one of the Talmidim from the Baal Shem Tov was a Maya Primishon, referred to as Maya Aguda from Tisham. He's the first one. His great-grandson was Rabbi Mordcha of Nedvana. I believe Nedvana is in Romania. I'm not sure. And the Mordcha was a very well-known Rebbe. And from him, his children spread out, and there's basically two groups. There are Nedvana Rebbes, and there's Chernov Rebbes. My upstairs neighbor actually is a son of the Chernov Rebbe from Jerusalem, but there's quite a number of Chernov Rebbes, or some have the name Chernov, some other than Pittsburgh Rebbe is one, the Cleveland Rebbe is another. There's a number of Rebbes that were from Chernov, Moshe Rebbe. They all follow a certain derech that goes back to Nirvana. These people are very friendly, with the Chassidim very close, not putting off, but they're a little spooky in some of the things that they do. That's I guess altogether, Chernov probably is still, with all of the groups that are from Chernov, it probably still is only a medium size. Take all the Chernov Rebbes, it's probably only medium size. Maybe possibly with all of them together, it might get into a large size, but I don't think it's much more than that. Okay, even with all of them together, they're not very large. They're most likely still in the medium size of Hasidus. And there's a lot of them around. And again, they marry into different families. I know people who are in the Einekloch who are descended from the Vayna Rabbis. The next one comes from the descendants from the Menuchim Chernobler, who was a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov, and also he went to the Rebbe for Mezrich. He's considered as being a Talmud from Baal Shem Tov. In his work, Violating, he wrote it. He had his son, Mort of Chernov. Chernov was that city where the nuclear accident occurred, where you can't go there anymore. So anyways, the Mort of Chernov had 7 sons, but there's only 3 sons who have until today a Chassidus that is of any size. Now, his sons at one time had been very big. They were in the Ukraine, and they were actually very big at one time. But again, the war wiped out a lot of Hasidic groups, and the same could be said of the descendants of Mordcha Chernov. Okay, so there are 3 groups. What I believe is the largest group is Skver in the city of New Square which is near Muncie, a city of about an hour or so, hour and a half drive from New York City. Okay. The new Skver Rebbe lives in his own community. It's very blocked off. The outside world is basically cut off from them. They have very little to do with the outside world. Of course, some people go to work, so they come into Manhattan, something like that. But essentially, it's one of the Chasidics that are very isolated from the outside world. And they have a number of interesting customs. Skver does follow that Russian way of doing things. He is much friendlier, you might understand from people who've seen him. But for example, he prays in his own room. He has his own room to pray. He has a separation from the rest of the people. Okay. So there's more of that there, but he is somewhat friendly. Skver is definitely a large Chassidus. They have over 1,000 families. Okay. It's not a mega Chassidus, but it's a large Chassidus. Then, next one I want to talk about is Rachma Strivka. The last Rachma Strivka Rebbe in Borough Park was a brother-in-law of the present Skver Rebbe. He was a son-in-law by his father. And he died a few years ago. He was very well respected in the Hasidic world, very well respected. I've seen him many times. When I used to go, when I lived in this area, Rosh Hashanah, I would go to him to get blessed for the new year. He was one of the few rabbis I would go to. His group is a medium size, but it is growing. Now, when he died, it split up. So I'm not sure how much is in each different group. His second son, his oldest son died, so his second son is Rebbe in Borough Park in the main shul. But he has sons in Lakewood and a few other places, in Jerusalem, other places like that. I'm not quite sure of the size of it. I would say if you take them all together, it's probably on the largest size of the medium. I don't know if they have 1,000 families. It's possible they do altogether 1,000 families. I don't really know if they have individually 1,000 families, but they're on that large medium size. They may have even reached into the large size. Interesting enough, the Rachma Strivka Rebbe in Borough Park, he's a brother-in-law of my Rebbe. He's married to the sister of my Rebbe. So I've known him for a number of years. I actually know somebody that. Now there's another Rachma Strivka Rebbe in Israel. He is the previous Rachma Strivka Rebbe's nephew. His Chassidus, I believe, is probably in the medium size. Again, they follow the derech Rachma Strivka, a little bit, more friendly than it might have been in Europe. Many of the things that they did in Europe, these kinds of derechs, that it was in Russia where the Rebbes were like very separated, just didn't work after the war. Okay, and the final one is Chernov. Chernov is descended from from one of the sons of Mata Chernov. There are two, actually there's more than two, but there's really two main ones. There's one in Borough Park, who I know personally. I was involved in an issue regarding Judaism that I went into a conference and we sat and we talked together. He actually told me I should sit because we were talking about not a personal thing going to as for Rebbe, but I was going to speak to him about an issue of Judaism, of the Jewish community. And so because of that, he told me I should sit. It's a little protocol by Rabbis, you don't sit, but if you're dealing with something like that, he'll sometimes ask you to sit because he's not speaking as Rebbe, speaking in this kind of thing. So I have met him, I've seen him, he's very, very, very well respected. He's very, very nice. Now he has a nephew, again, in Israel, who is Chernobyl Rebbe there. I believe it's his nephew. Again, both of them are probably medium size. I don't think either of them broke into the large size yet. And they are essentially, again, a little bit modified or tempered for the Russian way of Rebbe's doing things. They still have their courts, but they're much less separated than they were at one time. Okay, again, because sociologically things changed in America. You can't do it. You have to have a certain type of relationship. So, they adjusted to times. Okay, the last one that I want to deal with that goes directly back to the Baal Shem Tov was a group called Visionitz. Now, Visionitz comes out of The starter was Mendel Kosover. His father, Yaakov Koppel, was the Chazan. He led the prayers by the Baal Shem Tov. And the Kosover was followed after. He was a Chasidic. He was a Talmud from a number of the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov themselves. So he goes back to that time. From Kosovo came out a number of different Chasidic groups, none of which are really of any significance today, except for Visionists. The Mendel Kosover's grandson was also named Menachem Mendel, and he was a son-in-law of the Rizhiner, from Rizhin. So from there, a number of things about Rizhin got into Visionists. Later on, his grandson, Yisrael, was a son-in-law by from Meyer from Jikov, who was a grandson of Ropshitsurov. We mentioned Ropshitsurov as being one of the most significant Rabbis in the area of Galicia, which is the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so Visions has brought together basically three groups: Vision, Kosev, Vision, and Ropshitz. You see things from the Ginim and all kinds of things to bring together, and the whole derech from the social visions, the friendliness and warmth that you get from Ropshitz and stuff, tempered, and Kosev also was the same way, tempered the vision, derech, so that you find that with him and behind him, although they were big Rabbis, they still, that. Now, Yisrael Visionser, his son after the war who took over was Chaim Meir. He lived in Israel. And when he died, he had two sons, Moshe in Israel and Matla in the United States. Now, both of them have passed within the last 10 years or so, leaving over a next generation. But each of these, they left their sons, meaning multiple Visions of Rabbis. So let's go in Israel. In Israel, the oldest son, Yisrael, is the main Visions Rebbe, and his Chassidus is definitely a large Chassidus. They definitely have more than 1,000 families there in the United States. And he follows the Visions of friendliness, and Naginim singing is very important, friendliness. He's a big Talmud Chacham, learning. After he became Rebbe, he came to New York, and Friday night, he had his Tish and his davening. So I went to davening with a friend of mine who was a Visions, and I went there. And when it came to saying good chabas, it was very friendly, so I wasn't a vision. So he asked me who I was and asked me all kinds of things and talked with me for a few minutes. Very, very friendly, and being this is the old Vision Sadech. Now his brother Mendel, who's also a Vision Sadech, takes after the Vision Sadech. So with him, it's very, very separate. You can't come anywhere near him. It's more, more distance to the Hasidim from him. So he takes the vision aside from Visions, and Mendel and Sulcha takes the Kosovo Visions and Ropshitz side of it, the friendliness of the Again, the derech is, I have some sforim of them, and I have very nice visions. There are multiple visions. When he died, he left over, I believe, 5 sons. One is in Jerusalem, one is in Muncie, where he was. There was one in Williamsburg, there's one in Lakewood, I think. Maybe he had more than 5 sons. Anyways, each of his sons was given a particular place in which to set his community, and I don't know which one is the biggest one, well, quite frankly. What I've heard from people who've gone to different ones is the one in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, who I happen to know because his father-in-law, I was a Malamed in the yeshiva of his father-in-law, the square Rebbe from Borough Park. It was a very small group, but he does have a yeshiva. He did have a yeshiva here when I was there. Now he has a yeshiva again, but whatever. So I knew him, and very, very, very nice and warm, and very, very like that. I actually taught one of his sons in my class. So what I understand is he's considered the most visions, the best vision of Matul Shulman. Now again, these are visions. They have their own derech. When the Moshe was in the United States, I've seen him with his way he does Tish, and the Matul used to come once a year from Muncie here, and I used to go to pray with him. I have a custom that I say Psalms every day, and I started Matul when he prayed. that he used to say Psalms before davening, and I do it like him, but he used to say with such a sweetness of saying the Psalms throughout back and forth, and very, very sweetness. He used to say with a sweetness, in his prayers that, so that's a custom, but that's visions, okay? So these are basically those who go back to the Baal Shem Tov somewhere or another, okay? There are differences, again, which we see from the places where these are mostly in Russia, because the direct was where, because the Baal Shem Tov was essentially in Russia and Ukraine, the Rebit was in Russia and Ukraine, and only later it started going to Poland. So these go back to there. The next generation, we're going to start seeing people who are talmidim from the Rebit who, spread out in other parts of Europe. And eventually, for example, Poland became almost totally Chasidic. Most of the Hasidim that exist in the world actually came from Poland before the war. Okay, so let's take a break for a couple of minutes while I rest, and I will entertain any questions. Dan, any written questions?
I have a question.
Okay, of course. Okay, I guess it must be interesting. I mean, it is new material. You've probably never seen it, heard this before. Veronica, I forgot. Of course, you have to ask a question.
Of course I do.
What would it be if Veronica did not ask a question?
Well, how do you keep track of all these families?
What?
How do you keep track of all these families?
Well, we're going to find out when the next unit we're going to be talking about is Tanakh, Noahides and Tanakh. And there's a lot of stuff about families there also. But when these are relatives of yours, when these are things that are related to you, you know about it. Okay? I have relationships with, I've been by a lot of these different Rabbis. I've been to Vishnitz, I've been to and some of them are familiar relationships. For example, my son in Israel's religion, my grandson just got engaged. His wife is a Halberstam, which is from Sanz, and she's also from, Ropshitz and a few other places. So, that's just the way that's just the way it is. We, Hasidim know about other Hasidim. We're not separated. And Lubavitch is not as familiar with these things, but other Hasidic groups, we know about each other. We know different Rabbis go and meet each other. For example, when the Vishnu Rabbis come to America, they visit my Rebbe, and when my Rebbe will go visit them. It's a thing that is a certain protocol among the Rabbis. Okay, so when these Rabbis, the Beyond Rebbe comes to America, he visits my Rebbe goes to visit him. I remember once that an Advanced Rebbe from Israel came to America, my Rebbe went to him to visit him. Okay, there's certain protocols, and so we, there's a certain degree of respect we give to each other, and so we know about them. Okay, many of the Rabbis will come to America, and as part of raising money for the yeshivas and institutions in where they come from, they'll have Friday night. It's called the Tish, and people from the whole town, the whole area will come to them to see how they pray, how they, listen to Torah from them, how they, to see their service of Hashem. So we are familiar with them. Visions I've seen many times have been my visions. Okay, beyond not as much. Chasidic almost not at all. Okay, Breslov I know that. Chernov Square, Rachmaskif. I've been in each of these places at one time or another, and that is not unusual. I have grandsons that come here. One of my daughters lives in New Jersey, and so her children come. They learn in the Seder, but sometimes they come from your Shabbos, and they will come here, and after we eat the meal, they will go to whichever Rebbe is in town to go to his Tish, see his Torah, see how he does things, whatever. This is very, very common. So I think they go because they want to become Hasidim, but they just want to see another Rebbe, another person who's serving Hashem, to enjoy it. I remember when I was younger, for example, one of the Rebbe's, we're going to mention him later on, there was a Rebbe, he's not alive, his son is now the Rebbe, because we're talking about a story of over 40 years ago. And so I went Friday night to see where he prayed, because he's known for vigorous prayer. And he, you could see he put everything into it. It was really something to see. Same with there's another Rebbe. He used to say the Shema. It took him 45 minutes to say the 3 parshas of the Shema. Say every word, and it was known that was his one of his things about it. And so we go to other Rebbes to see what it's like. There are some groups that are much more restrictive as part of that, but my group is not. It's not a big deal. We just we go to see other people how they serve Hashem. It's not that we're going to become Chasidim with them or whatever. We're going to. It's just we want to go see another person. It's like say you're a diamond dealer, okay, and you do you have your own diamonds, but you also like to see somebody else's diamonds. It's your business. It's your thing that you like, so you like to look at them guys. And so Chasidim, especially when you're younger. When you're older, you don't as active going around, but when you're younger. You go to different Rebbes to see what they're like. And so that's how you know about these things.
And I think that's why some of us can find it a little bit foreign, in the sense that we never used to do that. Go to different churches or whatever and have that kind of community. So it's a little different, compared to.
Remember, again, one of the you bring up a very important point, because this is really what the Noahide Path is about. There are certain things from Christianity that people took for granted that are just wrong. The concept of somebody else serving Hashem in a different way from you, different customs, different things, whatever, and still being somebody that you revere and respect and look up to because of the greatness, is something Christians don't really understand. Christians has a totally different way of serving Hashem than we do. Beyond is totally different from us. There's a lot of differences in dress, but that doesn't mean that we cannot appreciate the way the Rabbis serve Hashem. It just happens not to be the way that our Rabbis taught us, our particular customs. And that is what Judaism is about. That's why you have Sephardim, who have different ways of life, and people are Ashkenazim, and we're all Jews, and we respect and revere other people, and we even enjoy watching some of the customs, and it's no problem, because the bottom line is we're all trying to serve Hashem, and nobody is doing anything that's wrong. It's just there's a certain differences in the way they're doing things, but these differences don't really mean anything in the end. And that's really what the Noahide Path is, to try and understand that, one second, as a Christian, there's a lot of things I took for granted. And a lot of things that I thought were what Hashem wanted, and that's just wrong. It's like, I say this all the time, the Encounter Mission. When I see some of the things that go on in Christians, if someone believes something slightly different, if someone says, well, you have to have a full immersion, and you have to dunk 3 times, and the other one says, no, you have to do 2. Well, the one who says 3 times is the one 2 isn't saved. They're going to hell because they didn't do proper immersion. I mean, all these kinds of things just seem bizarre to me. It's like, thinking that God has that type of a scale, that type of strictness is just something that's just totally bizarre. And it's not Torah. It's just not what Torah is. And that, again, is one of the important things about the Noahide Path that we really want, I want to do, and I know there's a number of rabbis who are supporting me on this particular issue. They might disagree with about some of the halachic things that I'll be teaching you, but on this particular issue, they very much agree that it is very important for Noahides to understand certain things that they, as Christians, they were taught was wrong. The idea of going to another church to see how they do it. I mean, listen, let's see, if God forbid I was a Christian tomorrow, I'd love to go to a Catholic church and see how they do things, and Orthodox to see how they do things, because I don't see there being anything wrong with it. Why shouldn't you see, some different ways of expressing your religion, but that's not really what you have. I mean, Catholic Church says if you don't follow them, you're going to hell, right? Orthodox seems is the same way, and then you go, but this is not the way God is. God is just isn't that picky, okay? He's much more liberal about these kinds of things, and we see that in Judaism forever. I mean, the rabbis have always been that way. Contrary to what people think, the rabbis have been very. What I refer to it as a lot of times a heteroorthodoxy. There is a fundamental orthodoxy that exists, a set of fundamentals, like the fundamentalists. There's certain fundamentals which you have to follow to really be orthodox. But beyond that, it's really hetero. There's a lot of things that could be different. Sephardim daven have their order of prayers is different than the order of prayers of Ashkenazim. There's no problem with that. They're fundamentally doing the same thing. They're just a different expression of the same thing. And a lot of this. And that's something that Noahides have to understand. This concept of that there are some things that can be different, that it's okay, it's fine. That's what Chassidus is about, that's what Judaism is about. So for example, Chassidim don't think that those who are Litvish, who don't follow the Chasidic way, are going to hell because they don't do that. They don't follow our way. They're just serving Hashem in a different way. It's just not the way that we think. We think the way from the Baal Shem Tov, what he taught is the best way to serve Hashem. Doesn't mean that somebody else is going to go to hell because they don't follow that. Again, this is an issue that Christians, or and again, Noahides come out of Christianity. This is something that it's like baked into you, and you don't understand. And there's a lot of these things. So this is what the purpose of these series is going to be. So in the next unit, we're going to be talking about the Noahides and Tanakh, and most of it's going to be, besides, there'll be a part where I'll talk about what Noahides are allowed to learn. But the real thing that I want you to get out of that is how much what you thought you knew about the Tanakh, you were so wrong about. All those things that you thought you knew about what the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh was, how really wrong you were. And how you looked at it at one time, how really wrong that was, and what is really how you should how you should be looking at the Tanakh. Okay? That's what the major part of what I'm going to be doing. I'm guaranteed we're going to have a lot of discussions about that and a lot of questions, because that's going to be a very hot topic. I know. But that's what's important. That is really much more important than, at least in my mind, the differences in the actual halachas you can follow as Noahides. The only thing that is really important is that it's very important for you to choose a rabbi who really is knowledgeable. When you see the knowledge that I have, you want somebody who has that kind of knowledge. He may not agree with me, but you want to know somebody who exhibits that type of intimate knowledge of the sources about Noahide laws and can communicate fluently with it and explain what's going on and let you know. You want somebody who's like that, even if they disagree with me. Maybe even if they disagree and say, no, I believe that the proper way is to follow this. Even if you disagree with it, that's fine, the disagreement. But what's important and fundamentally important is you should be looking for a rabbi to speak to these issues who really knows this stuff, okay? And not there's a lot of people who teach on the internet Noahide laws who really do not know, have never really learned the sources. They don't know, for example, about the Mashu, what he says in Avodah Zarah, for example, talking about what Noahide's allowed to learn, what they're allowed to teach them. Okay, and these are very, very. We're going to talk about this next time, and I'll mention some of these things because I want you to know when you're listening to somebody, does he know these things or not? Now, by the way, Moshe Weiner does. I've seen it discussed. These things do appear in his divine code, at least in the Hebrew version. I haven't looked in the English version, the notes of it. I hope he doesn't have that much notes because these things become very confusing for Noahides. Have to leave the learning of these kinds of stuff to rabbis who can do it, But the point is that you want a rabbi, a person that you're going to go to ask questions who intimately knows this. As I said before, right now I'm going to a review of the Gemara and all the Rishonim, Achronim, all the rabbis, how they talk about it, and then the responsive literature on different subjects. particular subject I just finished now was in dealing with what a Noahide's learning Torah and what we're allowed to teach Noahides. Because that's going to be the next one I'll do. But each and every one of them goes, all this stuff again, even though I've done it in the past. Then I'll go back and look at different works that I've worked with Rabbi Weineright reads. I went through his notes took him about 15 minutes to go through his notes because I already learned all the stuff that it's all based on. And I said, one second, I'll talk about this particular interpretation of the response from the Rambam. He didn't understand it correctly. It means something different. Okay? Whatever. These things are not important for you as Noahides to worry about. What's important for you to know is that, you want somebody who is knowledgeable, who really exhibits an intimate knowledge of the sources that are important as far as to know what is the law that you're supposed to follow. That's what you want to have. And if you got somebody, then that's fine. If they disagree with me, that's fine. They want to talk to me, we can argue out the sources, whatever. That's no big deal. Jews love to argue. When it comes to Torah, we love to argue with each other. But that's you as a Noahide have to realize, okay, I need somebody who I can speak to. This guy really knows his stuff. Okay, when he says something, he clearly has on what to rely upon what he says because he knows what he's talking about. And it's very important that you should have it too. And my experience so far has been that most of the people who are teaching Noahides, who are very sincere and very much wanting help, most of the people I see and really don't know. They really don't. They don't even know how to interpret things properly. So these will be discussions that will come later. But, again, you're right. Judaism, and we say it's not Judaism, we really say the Torah paradigm. So like I said, the Torah paradigm is different from Christianity, and sometimes it's going to sound very foreign to you because you've never been exposed to these kinds of ideas. But as Jews, we take this for granted. When we see these things in the Christian world, where somebody thinks if you're Baptist you're going to heaven, but if you're or for example you're Calvinist going to heaven, but you're not a Calvinist you're going to hell. I mean, come on, that makes no sense at all. Okay, and that's because the Torah does not put that much into that kind of stuff. It's not that we don't have theology, but we don't, we're not interested in who's going to hell or not. Hell I'm not going to say there aren't any works which talk about hell, but it's very hard to find them. Even in the works that talk about moral instruction, hell is not a very big deal. It's not really talked about because the main thing is what you do, how you can improve yourself. And if you did something wrong, how to repent. That's all. Okay, I think I went a little bit too long on that issue, but that's one of the things about the 7 o'clock session. I seem to go on and get questions that keep introducing things that, I'm sure I'm repeating some of the stuff that I say because it's very, very important pedagogically to understand the fundamental important thing that we're trying to do in the Noahide Path is specifically dealing with those issues that will help Noahides who had been Christians to understand that the Torah paradigm, the Torah way of life, even as it applies even to Noahides, is totally different from what is in Christianity. Once you notice it's different, you'll be much more fulfilled. Both, not only will you live more correct life, but I personally feel that you'll feel much more fulfilled in your spiritual life also. We're going to discuss about spiritual life also with Noahides also. That's another issue. Everything I have to do takes so long to do it because I have to set the basis and foundations of things so that it's very easily understood. Okay, Veronica, I know I over-answered your questions. Did I miss anything you wanted to know?
Oh, that was perfect. Thank you.
Okay, any other more questions? Otherwise, we will continue. Starting at the Talmidim from the Rebit Bear, the Magen message. No questions? Okay. The first one we have to do is, of course, Lubavitch. The founder of Lubavitch, Nir Zalman, he was actually from Chasidic Yadi. His son was in Lubavitch, actually. Was a Talmud in Mezrich, but after the Maggid died, he went to the Mendel Vitebska. That's not talked about in Lubavitch very much. We talked about that last time. Okay, Lubavitch today, while there had at one time been a number of different Lubavitch groups, they all disappeared with time. The only one that exists today was the Lubavitch group that followed through to the Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak and his son-in-law Menachem Mendel, who died in 1994. Today, Lubavitch does not have a Rebbe. Okay? Unlike in Breslov, where the Rebbe himself assigned a person to be like the main mashpia, and in every generation like that, there were specific known leading mashpiyim who talk over. Lubavitch is basically very anarchic. Anarchic is the word. There really isn't any central authority or even group authorities that have that type of control as there was in Breslov. What's going to happen because of it? I don't know. You know, it is 30 years since Lubavitch Rebbe died. We have now a whole generation of people who've never, ever seen the Lubavitch Rebbe. They only know the Lubavitch Rebbe from, videos and stuff like that. I remember the Lubavitch Rebbe because, as I said, we used to go to, I'd gone to Crown Heights for Brengens a few times and saw that. It was really something to see. It's a bucher. It was very, the Lubavitch Rebbe used to talk, and he could talk and talk and talk, and it was like, it was something to see, to be there. And I mean, I have seen the videos. The videos are absolutely nothing like the real thing, having been there. It's just not what it is. It's an experience that you really had to have seen. He would talk, and then he would have them sing. It was something to have seen. I mean, Baruch Hashem, I'm old enough that now I talk to the younger people that say, I saw this, I saw that, I saw this, and I tell them about what it was. That's one of the things about being an old man, is you can talk about things that was, a long time ago. Debbers who haven't been here for many, many years. I mean, 30 years not being here doesn't seem very much to me because I remember that time. But it is 30 years. So you have a whole generation of people growing up. A lot of Menachem Mendel, a whole generation of people growing up who not only grew up after he died, but are now married and having children who never met him, have no firsthand knowledge. And that is a significant issue. Okay? Because the direct input from a rabbi is very important. Breslov has a little bit of that problem, but they seem to have at least ameliorated it, so it's not so bad because what they do is have mishpiyim. But Lubavitch, I know they're trying various things, but there's no unity there. Excuse me. There's a lot of conflicts that are going on. So what's going to happen to Lubavitch in the future? I don't know. Now, when the Lubavitch Rebbe was alive, his Chassidus was a Russian type Chassidus. Okay. Number one, if you've seen pictures in 770, there is a stage where he prays by himself, totally separated from the people. The Lubavitch Rebbe was held above and separated from all the Chassidim. If you see the way the Lubavitch Chassidim talk about the Rebbe is not even a human. He's like outside of that. Okay, it's about that is particularly a Russian Chassidus, something that developed. We used to see it in religion, but it's not as much today as it was before. Groups like that where the Rebbe was basically not a god, but pretty. He wasn't really a human being either. Okay, whereas other groups will find, like in the other Talmudim, looked at the Rebbe as somebody who was a human being whose holiness was more than us. So, for example, my Rebbe, he is somebody who is clearly spiritually above me. I have no problem saying that. Not only learning in his service to Hashem, he's clearly above me, but he is a human being. Okay? The Kotzker Rebbe used to say, there's a verse in Anshe Kodesh Tili, you should be holy people to me. He used to say that Hashem could have made angels. Didn't need to have that. He couldn't, but he created men so that you see Anshe Kodesh, you be holy to me in a human way. Because you're human beings. Fundamentally, understand you're human beings. Your holiness should be the holiness of a human being. Because God didn't make angels. He made you as human beings. And in certainly good in other ways, the Rebbes are not gods. They're above. They are people who are spiritually above us. And theoretically, we could reach that level. But, they're above. Whereas in the Russian Hasidim, didn't look at it that way. And Lubavitch is another example of that. There is a significant separation when the Lubavitcher Rebbe was alive, and of course now he's not alive, it's even worse, but there's a significant distance between the Rebbe and his Hasidim. Not that he didn't, top of the Hasidim. When he gave out dollars, he maybe had a 30 seconds. I'm talking about a real separation. Even when it's saying Yechidus was like a minute or two. And I've been by that, my present Rebbe's father-in-law and his father. I would be in 15, 20 minutes, maybe even longer sometimes, depending on what was the situation. And that for me would not be unusual, because there was that type of relations. When my Rebbe was praying, I could go to him after his prayers and talk with him for, a certain amount of time about things that came up. I know of a number of stories where that actually happened. I remember one time Tish, my wife had just had a child, whatever, and I asked my Rebbe, this was like 40-something years ago, about my wife wanted to fast on Tisha B'Av. And so I came up and spoke to him right after davening. I just walked up to him. There was no problem. Nobody stopped me or anything like that. I walked up to him and he told me I should go home and make my wife eat right away. I shouldn't, she can't fast. I have to meet her. But the point is that this type of closeness, which is very common, visits all kinds of different places that do that way, that don't run the Chasidic like in Russia. That kind of closeness is what exists. Baal Shem Tov was also that way, and until this is a later development, like many other some number of things are later developments that came. Okay, and that's where Lubavitch comes from. Okay, that's just it's just a Russian Chassidus, and in that sense is that. Now the other thing, of course, that makes Lubavitch different other place is it has a similarity to Breslev in that all of its Hasidic works are based off of the work Tanya. And even the Alter Rebbe's teachings that he had are basically go around things that are talked about in Tanya. And that's what all the Chassidus is about. So a lot of other issues, where the teachings of Rabbi Nachman actually cover a lot more issues. It's not as focused on certain types of things as Tanya is, but essentially it is also based around one work. Whereas Tanya is like basically limited amount of issues that it's dealing with. It's dealing with specific sorts of things. Breslev has more things, but other Hasidic groups aren't that focused. They deal with a lot of things. That's why we learn different form from different ebbas, because each one will concentrate on certain things. So that's what Lubavitch is. Lubavitch is obviously, as you all know, is got to be considered a mega Chassidus. We don't know how many Lubavitch Chassidim there are in the world, by the way. It's very hard to tell, because we know what's in Crown Heights. Out of Crown Heights in New York, there's not really very many Chabad Chassidim and out of Crown Heights. Borough Park doesn't have, Williamsburg doesn't have any more, Borough Park doesn't have very much. I don't think Muncie has very much. Lakewood, I don't think has much either. So in New York itself, Crown Heights doesn't have very much. But they do have shluchim around the world in different cities. It's very hard to say actually how much. So I'm pretty sure that you can say that it is a mega Chassidus. I mean, I could be wrong. It may just be a large Chassidus, not a mega Chassidus, but it's pretty sure that it is. And I would pretty much be confident in saying that it is smaller from both Ger and Satmar, which we'll be talking about soon. Okay, the next group that goes back to the Rebbe Bear is Karlin Stolen. They go back to that particular Chassidus goes back to Aaron Kalina, who was sent by the Maggid to White Russia and Lithuania. When he died, his son was too young, so Shlomo Kalina took over, and the Kalin dynasty went back to the sons of Aaron Kalina and continues until today. The Kalina Rebbe, who lived in New York and eventually moved to Israel, to Jerusalem. Now, the Kalina Rebbe himself was from here, and he was somewhat more modern. The Kalina Chassidim, again, have this Russian view of the Rebbe. I've heard them, they hold from the Rebbe almost like a god also. They're very, very, pretty much similar to what in Lubavitch. Now, what happened is when the Kalina Rebbe went to Jerusalem, okay, Kalin was also in Jerusalem, but the Hasidim in Jerusalem, Kalina Hasidim, were very, very religious. They were the exact opposite of being modern. They dressed in old Jerusalem dress, while the Kalina Rebbe did not. And there were a few other things of that nature, which was somewhat an issue. So what happened is in Israel, they broke off, a number of Hasidim broke off, and they followed another person who was also related to Kalin. And there's a group in Israel called Pins Kalin. That is small to medium in size. I don't know if it's reached the medium size, but it's small to medium in size. And they follow the old Kalin derech, very, very religious and very, very, Jerusalem like that. And the Kalina himself is much more modern. He's dressed much more modern. Now, the Kalina has a brother who's also a younger brother, is a Rebbe from Lutsk. He's very well respected. When he comes to America, he gets a lot of people who come to his Tish, very nice, whatever. So again, the size of Kalin is probably either large or just very high on the medium range, up almost to large. Now, when you mention Kalin, you also have to mention a group called Solanim. Solanim goes back to Karlin. So again, it goes back to Anklin afterwards. After Shlomo Karlina died, Usher was the son of Reb Aaron, became a Rebbe. And also there was another Rebbe from Talmidim, Motiv Lechavitz. I mentioned this the last time. When the Lechavitz died, he was followed by from Moshe Kabrin, although his son was a Rebbe also. The Kabrin became a Rebbe. I mentioned before my son in Israel, his wife is not only a religious article, she's also descended from the Kabrina. And the Kabrina, after him came Avram from Solanim. And that was a founder of the Solanim Chasidic dynasty. Now, the dynasty went from father to son, to grandson in one case, until the World War II. During World War II, the last Rebbe died. He was murdered by the Nazis. By that time, there was a group of Solanim Hasidim who had already been in the land of Israel, in the city of Tiberia. The head of that group there was Mordechai Castellanos, I believe was his last name, but he's better known as Mordechai Solanim. They chose him out to be the Rebbe. And he was the Rebbe for a certain time. When he died, another descendant from the Solanim Rebbes named Avram took over. And when he died, his son-in-law, Shulam Noach, took over after him. Now, the Shulam Noach is very interesting because he made a work which is, it's being printed, and I think ArtScroll is translating actually into English, called Nasiva Shulam, a very nice work. It's somewhat on the difficult side in some of the things, but it's a common work of that type. Discussing Solanim Chassidus, what it's about, the different kinds of things, and talks about a lot of Rebbes that from the first, second, third generation that are not always talked about. Solanim was like that. Nowadays, after the Nasiva Shulam died, there are two Solanims. One is his son, and the other is another descendant from the Solanim Rebbes. I don't know. One lives in Bnei Brak, one lives in Yerushalayim. Okay. Now, what's interesting about Solanim is my Rebbe's father-in-law. During the war, his father sent him out of Europe, smuggled him out of Europe, and sent him to, at that time it was called Palestine, to Israel. It was under the Turks at the time, if I remember correctly. No, it wasn't. I think it was under the British at the time. Okay, so he was smuggled into there, and he went to Jerusalem, and he learned in the Solanim Yeshiva. Now, I actually have them in my bookcases here. I have all the Sforim from the Solanim Rebbes because I just like it. I like what they talk about Hashem. It's not really a contradiction to our Masoris, but it's very nice. And so, my Rebbe's father-in-law, he brought into my group a custom from Solanim that he went there, and that is that they would learn continually for a certain amount of hours. It's called in Hebrew Shuas Tzifas, or continuous time learning. 2 hours to learn Talmud, 2.5 hours to learn to just continue to learning without doing anything, any interruption whatsoever. We actually have an interesting custom is when my Rebbe makes a wedding. It's now on the grandchildren. When he makes a wedding for his grandchildren, the boys learning in yeshiva they give him a present, and their present is the amount of hours that they learned continually. So sometimes some 1,000 hours, that they learned 1,500 hours of Torah learning as a present for him from the Chasana. They dedicate that every time before each Chasana, they learn Torah. So Hasidim are very much into learning. We come from Tzanz, and Tzanz is also very much into learning. But that particular custom came from Salonim, and my understanding is that a number of Hasidic groups, after my Rebbe's father-in-law brought in, they also follow that. They also try to bring that in order to strengthen the learning of Torah. But that comes from Salonim. Okay, there's two more I want to cover. The next one is bells. Now, the first bell is the Rebbe of Shulman of bells. He was a Talmud. He learned by Reb Shulman of Lutsk. If you remember last time I mentioned that Reb Shulman, he was the one who gathered together the teachings of Rebit and the most well-known, most learned work called Likutei Amorim of the teachings of Rebit. He was the one who wrote that. Shulman of bells was his student. Shlomo died. The bells went to the Chosidic from Moblin, who's the next generation. The Chosidic was a Talmud, as I mentioned. The Chosidic was a Talmud of the Rebbe and the Rebbe Alemelech. Now, I just want to mention that the Chosidic actually had sons and grandsons who were Rabbis. There was a famous dynasty called Henshin, which was fairly nice sized in Europe. It was totally wiped out in the war. There's no remembrance of it whatsoever. Okay, again, that was the reason why we have so few, Hasidic groups that we can talk about of any size is because the war wiped out everything. If it hadn't been for the war, I would probably have to do this in 2 or 3 sessions. But because of the war, I can do this all in 1 session, because virtually all groups were wiped out. Okay? And Peshischa, Yitzchak of Peshischa, he had sons who were Rabbis, and they had Chasidic groups. And although there is one descendant, Parasov, who was still alive today, whatever, they're just small. They're not significant. They're not significant enough that I should be talking about them. Not that they don't exist, but they're small groups. Not significant, but they would have been significant if it hadn't been the war. So it's very important to remember. Now, the Belzeruf today, he is the nephew of the last Belzeruf. What happens, the last Belzeruf, before him, all of his children were killed during the war. He had no children who lived through the war. The only one who made it through the war was his brother, who was the present Rebbe's father, and the brother's wife, and he was born after the war. Somewhere around my age group, I think. So he has actually only one son. So Belz is pretty much not going to split, but his son, Mordechai, has a number of sons after that. So Belz will probably split. Belz is definitely in the large category. I don't think it's a mega Chassidus, but it's definitely in the large category. Okay, there's Belz Chassidim primarily in Jerusalem, but there's also in America I have cousins who are Belz Chassidim. Okay, and the last one I talk about is a specifically Jerusalem Chassidus called Lelev. Now, the first Lelev Rebbe, David of Lelev, was a student of Rebbe Melech, and also from the Chayz of Lublin, and he also was close with Yaakov Yitzchak of Peshischa. Now, his son eventually went to Israel, and so Lelev settled in Israel and became an Israeli, specifically Jerusalem Chassidus. Nowadays, there's a number of Lelev Rebbes, and all of them together probably are in the medium. If you count all of them together, probably in the medium. What somewhat makes it important is one of the Lelevers, who doesn't even call himself a Rebbe, a Melech Biderman. He's a very well-known Mashpia, and when he has either Tish or something, he can have hundreds of people there. So although he's not a Rebbe, if he would be a Rebbe and take it, he would probably automatically be from a middle size of Chassidus. he has that many people. He's very well respected. I actually know his brother. His brother lives in London, sometimes comes to New York, and he davens Shabbos in the same place I daven on Shabbos. He davens what's called Vasikin, very early morning minyan. He davens there also. But this is, again, a pretty well-known Jerusalem Hasidus. They come from Poland, but their customs are all from Jerusalem. And there's a bunch of little Rebbis, but each one has maybe 10 families or something like that. So basically, they're in the small size. I don't think there's a total of 1,000 families that are level Hasidim. Okay, next we're going to go to the next generation that comes after that, from Talmudim of the Chois and that. And I'm going to just take a break for a couple of minutes and then we'll go on from there. And again, I will entertain any questions. Yeah, no questions from anybody? Oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah. Well, Dan, the next unit we're going to do, that's going to have a lot of questions and a lot of stuff. We're going to start getting back into more. This is more Jewish studies. It's not really Noahide law, Noahide up. I mean, there is some, of course, ideas about the Noahide path that we talk about that comes up all the time, but the next one is going to start getting into the real stuff that is going to is certainly going to bring a lot of questions. So I'm not really sure actually how much. I mean, I expect it'll take 2 sessions, but depending on the questions, we could be talking about 3 or 4 questions. Okay, Daniel, so what if my local rabbi doesn't know much about Noahides? Then you should not be asking him questions about Noahide laws. You should try and find somebody who can answer you personally. I believe in personal interaction. Until you can find somebody, Divine Code is a very good book to look at. Again, I disagree with some things in the Divine Code, and I'll explain to you why it is when it comes up, where the disagreements are. Some of these things I've talked with Moshe about. Moshe Weiner is a very big, again, I have to say, Moshe is a very big Talmud Chacham. If you look at the notes that he has in the Hebrew version, copious notes, we're dealing with somebody who's clearly, has spent the time looking at the things. It's just, I disagree with some of the interpretations that he has there. I don't know if it's because the Lubavitcher Rebbe, said things, so he's trying to interpret these sources so that it agrees with what the Lubavitcher Rebbe taught. I don't really know. I'm not really, feel myself hampered by that. You'll find actually that there's some things that I'll teach that I know my Rebbe has said the exact opposite to, but because of how my way of teaching Noahides is to basically follow what the consensus and majority view is, not a minor view that might come from a certain source. So that will, make certain things. Well, these will all come up sometime. I'm not surprised. In fact, I'm very happy because there's a lot of material here. But this is basically more Jewish studies than Noahide law. Although again, everything I discuss will have something to do with Noahide Path. Okay, let's go. Now, the next few we're going to do are specifically groups that are in Poland. Okay? The Polish Hasidim were somewhat different. They're not like the Russian, and they're not like those that were in Austro-Hungarian Empire, even though they're not like the Russian, even though these areas were mostly under Russia. It had its own unique form, because these were followers from Pshischa, Simcha ben of Pshischa. Now, those that weren't followers of Pshischa, they would be more commonly like what we find in Austro-Hungary. Radomsk, for example, a little bit of mix of both. Radomsk was a Rebbe and not a Ruv, but his Hasidus would be more closer to what you find in Austro-Hungary than you would find in Russia. Okay, but The reason why I don't talk about him is because there's no Radomsk anymore. That was a large Chassidus in Poland that was totally wiped out. Sadly, I'm only dealing with those that exist. I'm not talking about those that had existed at one time. So that is why we just, there's just a lot of groups that are important, that have very important works that people, learn, that just don't exist because they were wiped out in the war. It is not possible to overestimate the tragedy and damage of what happened and to the Hasidic movement in Europe in the Second World War, were basically wiped out almost all the Hasidim that existed and almost all of the Rabbis. I can go through quite a number of Rabbis of specific sizes, from all kinds of different groups that just no longer exist at all. There's no remembrance of them at all whatsoever. People who were very important in different areas, they're just not. Sometimes you find that there's small Hasidus, having a synagogue with, a few people that come there, but pretty much wiped out. Okay, so the first one we're going to deal in, let me just introduce the subject. Remember that the Choyzev had one of his students, one of the main ones, was Yaakov Yitzchak from Peshischa. When the Peshischa died, Simcha Binim from Peshischa took over. And after Simcha Binim died, there were basically two Rabbis who were the mainstay of Peshischa Hasidus. There were others smaller than that, and none of the smaller ones actually exist at all, but the mainstays were either Mendel from Kotsk and Yitzchak from Volka. Okay? Now, the first group we're going to talk about is Ger. First Ger Rebbe was Itzhimayer from Ger. He was one of maybe the biggest Talmud from Mendel of Kotsk. He founded Hasidus today. Today, Ger is probably the biggest Hasidus in the world. My great-grandfather was actually Ger Chlusid, by the way. His great-grandson, the Beis Yisrael, when he died, he left over, Imre Emes, he died, he left over sons. First, his son Yisrael, Beis Yisrael, became Rebbe. After that, his son Simcha Bunim, called the Lev Simcha, became Rebbe. And after that, his last brother, Menachem, became Rebbe. After they all died, the son of the Lev Simcha, whose name was Bianca, became Rebbe of Ger. He's the Rebbe of Ger now. Ger is a mega chassid, over 10,000 families. In the last 5 years or so, his cousin, who was the son of Pnei Menachem, Reb Shaul, a lot of the Chassidim were not happy with the way Bianca was changing things from the way Ger had used to be. So they basically congregated Reb Shaul, and Shaul has basically built up a group. It's certainly a medium-sized Chassidus, and may even reach the large Chassidus, but Ger itself still has to be considered mega Chassidus. So that's what's Ger. In Europe, before the war, there was an argument. Ger was considered either the biggest or the second biggest Hasidic group in the world. Hundreds of thousands of families in Europe. Virtually all that was wiped out, and after the war, it rebuilt, and it's got tens of thousands of Hasidim. It's going to be the largest one. The next group is basically small Hasidus. It may, if you take in all of them together, it may have reached medium size, but I think it's pretty much on the small side. This is called Am Shenof. The Yitzchak Volka had a number of sons, and one of his sons was Yaakov Duvid. When Yaakov Duvid lived in the city of Am Shenof, and his descendants actually are still now. There was an Rebbe Yasser Am Shenover was in Borough Park. There's an Am Shenover in Israel. Together, they probably are a small-sized Hasidus, not much larger than that, but it is a well-known Hasidus, and it's worthy of knowing about. The Am Shenover in Israel is very well respected, but there's a younger Rebbe now. We'll have to see what happens in him. After that is Alexander. Now, before the war, Alexander Some said Alexander was bigger than Ger, and some said Ger was bigger than Alexander. Today, if you take all the Alexander Rabbis that exist in the world, you still have a small, I don't think it's gotten to the medium yet. I don't think there's more than 100 families. Possibly there's 100 families. I don't really think so. It may have more than 100 families. That's how small it is. So it went from being a Chasidic group with over 100,000 families to be wiped out to, if you take all the different Rebbe Zalman together, there may be 100 families, maybe a little bit more than that, but basically that's what it is. The founder of the line was Yechiel of Yechiel. He was a student in Alexander and Vorka, one of the Vorka Rebbes, not from Mamshanov. And his son is really considered the first Alexander Rebbe. His name is Rachmil Yisro Yitzchak. Yisro Yitzchak, by the way, was the name of the Vorka Rebbe. Rabbi Yitzchak Vorka was Yisro Yitzchak Vorka. He was the first Rebbe. He had a work called Yismach Yisro. It's a very commonly learned work, very popular work. He died actually childless, so his brother Shmuel took over. And after him, I believe that he was killed during the war. He had a brother. I can't remember what it was. I think he had a brother, Betzal Yor, who took off after him anyways. His brother Shmuel, there is a work with Tfer Shmuel, which I have, and I actually like him more than Yismach Yisrael. And the descendants come from these other two brothers. Okay? Again, there's a number of them. There's an Israel, there's an Alexander. Essentially, if you take them all together, it may cross that boundary to be middle-sized Chassidus. I'm not really sure, really, if they do that or not. It's just that small. Okay. The last one of the Polish groups that is of any size today is Mudgets. The Mudgets Rebbe now in Bnei Brak, his brother calls himself the Kuzma Rebbe, but before that, he was also, but it's basically the same thing. This group traces itself back to Chesed from Kuzma, who was a Talmud from the Yaakov Yitzchak from Pshischa. He was not a follower of Simcha Bunim, as far as I know. They are primarily known for making Chasidic Neginim, Chasidic songs. The grandfather, Yisroel from Mudgets, has a work called Divrei Yisroel, which is very, very beautiful Chasidic cipher. It's one of those I learned also. A lot of people learn it. And they are basically centered in Bnei Brak. A few years ago, I went to Israel and I went with somebody around to a number of Rebbes and Bunim to discuss about a number of issues about Judaism and what's going on. And the Mudgets Rebbe was one of the people that I met. It was a very nice meeting. It was very, very nice. It was very interesting. Okay, let me take a break for just one more second, and then we're going to try and continue with the next group. Basically, this is the Rebbes from Galicia and into Hungary. Okay. First, we're going to talk about Ziddishov and Kamarna, and those groups that come from it. We'll first talk about Spink and then some other ones. Reb Hershel Ziddishov was a Talmud from the Chayes from Lublin, as were his four other brothers. But Hershel was the biggest one as far as that's concerned. He had two brothers, Yisroel Ber Ziddishov and Alexander from Kamarna, who were in themselves also very big. But their two sons, the nephews of Hershel Ziddishov, Yitzhak Isaac of Ziddishov and Yitzhak Isaac of Kamarna, were much more well known. And just like Hershel and Ziddishov, they wrote works in basically Kabbalah, or the Torahs, the teachings that they gave were very strongly Kabbalah based. Hershel Ziddishov had a son-in-law who also wrote a work called Das Kadoshim, which is also basic Kabbalah. So this Chassidus is very, very strongly influenced by Kabbalah. We're going to talk about Tzvi Malach from Dinov, who was a Talmud was not only a Talmud in the Choyza, but he also had a relationship with Ziddishov. And other groups that came out was number one is Spinka. Yosef Meyer Spinker was a Talmud of Yitzhak Isaac of Zidichoy. And he himself was a Rebbe. He set up a dynasty. Right now, there's quite a number of Spinker Rebbes. If you take them all together, they take into a medium group. I don't think any one of them by themselves is a medium-sized Chassidus, but all of the Spinkers that there are go into a medium group. The Zidichoy Kamana is even smaller. If you take all the Zidichoy Kamana Rebbes in the world, I think they're still small. I don't think there's 100 families. There may be, but I don't think they are. Now, another group that is related to them is Kossen. The first Kossen Rebbe was, I think, a son-in-law of Herschel Zidichoy, but he was later he was a Talmud from Tzvi Herschel of Tzvi Leimala from Dinah, and also from the first Tasha Rebbe. Tasha Rebbe was also influenced by Dinah. Both of these are strongly influenced by Kabbalah. Kossen much more influenced by Kabbalah than Tasha's. Okay, one of my son-in-laws is a Kossen Chassid. The Kossen Rebbe a number of years ago started a community in Linden, New Jersey, and he brought about 30 families. I think he said, my son-in-law said like 30, 40 families are there. Again, it's a small size Chassidus. They don't have more than 100. I think if you take all the Kossen Rebbes together, it might reach to a medium size because his brother in Muncie has a shul and he's attracted a lot of people to him. So I think altogether, it probably goes into the low medium range, probably somewhere between 100 and 200 at most. But Small Tush is in Montreal, and I believe that it is a medium size. I think there are more than 100 families there. Now, the final one, another one to talk here is about Dinah. The Dinah of Tzvi Leimala was a Talmud, as I mentioned, in Lublin. His uncle, his mother's brother, was Rabbi Meyer from Luzensk. And he started a dynasty, and he also made a significant Hasidic work called B'nai Saskin. Now, his dynasty includes a number of very large groups. Beluga was one of them, but again, the war wiped it out completely. And so Beluga, even though there's a couple of Rebbes, both of them together are just small. I don't think there's 100 families in the Beluga Hasidim. However, Dinah also, from Dinah came Munkach. The Munkacher in Europe was a very large Chassidus. Again, it was virtually wiped out. And after the war, the Munkacher and his brother, who's the Dinah Rebbe in Williamsburg, they settled here. They both have shuls. The Munkacher is in Borough Park and the Dinah is in Williamsburg. And together, they are certainly into the medium size. I think it's possible that each one is medium sized by themselves, but together they're also medium sized. They're definitely not large together. They're not either alone or together. I've seen the Munkacher Rebbe a number of times. I've not seen very, very, very well known. He's a Kabbalist and very well known. There's a very nice large shul here. Okay. Now, the next one I want to talk about Satmar, but I'm going, even though Satmar goes back to a Talmud from the Choizer, I want to go to talk about Sans. The reason why is because in the area of Galicia and in Hungary, that Sanzadov, who was a Talmud from the Ropshitsadov, the main Talmud from the Talmud from the Ropshitsadov, actually, was the most influential Rebbe. Okay? Through his son, the Shinvedov, many, many, many Rabbis and Rabbunim who became Chasidic in Hungary, for example, were his followers. So the influence from Sans is all over the place in many, many different groups. And when we talk about Satmar, because Satmar was also influenced by Sans, so that's why I wanted to bring this first. Through the Shinavit of his son. Now, the Sanzov had a number of sons. Today, there's only 2 of the sons that are in any way representative of any Hasidic group of any size. It's not that there aren't that exist, but they're not of any size. So, for example, I mentioned that my grandson became engaged. his Kala, the woman, the girl he's engaged to, is a Halberstam. Halberstam was named the Sanzruv. Her great uncle was the Sanzruv. Her cousin, now his son, is the Sanzruv in Borough Park. But it's very small. It's a small Chassidus. There's not even 100 families there. Okay, so there's a lot of groups that are related, but the Klausenberg and Bubba are really the only Sanzer groups today that exist of any size. Okay, there's a lot of small ones. There's a Shinover Shul and the Cheshnover Shul. There's all kinds of different ones that are very small, coming from different groups of Sans, whatever. But essentially, they were wiped out during the war. During the war, two of the sons were murdered, of Shaila Chechova and Shumleza von Atzfort, the two youngest sons of the Sanzruv. In addition, there were sons-in-laws of his. Luz Ashpetzina was killed in the war. I mean, I cannot maximize the tragedy of what happened to the war and how it affected the Hasidic groups. So Tzanz basically was that. But in the war, after the war, even today, the influence of Tzanz is very large in the Hasidic world. Many Rabbis are descended from Tzanz. Mentioned Racham Svivka, he's a brother-in-law from my Rebbe. That means that his children are now descendants from Tzanz. There's a bunch of the Visions is also descended from Tzanz. There's a bunch of other ones that Tzanz is just almost everywhere. You can find it there. But as far as groups that are considered following Tzanz Chassidus, at Alt's descent, Klausenberg and Baba are the one. Now, Klausenberg is smaller. It's in Israel and in the United States. Two sons, the old Klausenberger, lived in New York and then he settled in Israel. And when he died, he had two sons. One was living in New York and one's living in Israel. I'm not sure how many people in Israel. In New York, it probably has reached the level of a middle-sized Chassidus. Herzl, maybe that. So maybe both of them together. They may have reached a large-sized Chassidus. I really don't know if they have 1,000 families. They might not have them now put together. Now, Klausenberg does mostly what is in Tzanz, but he has also a number of customs that come from Dinah because he married into that. Now, the Klausenberger Rebbe, the last Klausenberger Rebbe, was, I believe, the grandson or great-grandson of one of the sons of the Sanzruv, the Baruch of Gorlitz, the Gorlitz Rebbe. My grandson's fiance, the one who was married, is also descended from the Gorlitz Rebbe through a different way, from Zmigid. There's a Zmigid Rebbe now also, but it's not important. Just telling you this. The world is these things are bad, but these were all basically wiped out. Okay. Now, when the Sanzruv died, interesting enough. Okay, so the Gorlitzer did not have a very, very large Chassidus, by the way. It was one of the smallest. But the Klausenberg ever lived through the war. Klausenberg was, I believe, the city of Cluj, which I believe is in Romania, and the Nazis did not deport them to Auschwitz until towards the end of the war. So he lived through the war. Whereas, for example, in Galicia, where the city group that I belong to, the Nazis conquered them in the very beginning of the war in 1939. And some people had fled to the other side, to the Russian side, because the Russian came from one side, Germany came from the other side. They went to the Russian side. That's a whole story. I don't want to get into that maybe until we can talk about what happened as far as that's concerned. But the Russian, and so people who were there, they were basically in the work camps for basically 6 years until the war ended. I mean, those who lived through it. Most of them did not live through the camps. So that's a Klausenberger, and he came from Gorlitz. Now, when the Sanzruv died, there were two groups that came from him, which were actually large size and influence. One was the Shinoverov, his oldest son, and he was very influential. A lot of the Rebbes that came about in Hungary were actually from his Talmidim. That we could say the same thing. We're going to talk about Satmar. The two Satmar was also from Chasidim and Chernov, and a lot of other groups had relationship with Chernov one way or another. And the second one was Bubba. Now, Bubba, the first Rebbe of Bubba, who was also the rabbi, said he was the Bubba Ruv, He was a grandson of the sons of. His son was his father was, I believe, the second son of the sons of, or the third one. I get the confusion. He died when he was in his 20s, very young. So the first Bavarov, he was raised by his mother's father, who was a son from the Rob Shitzaru. So that in Bavov, they basically followed sons, but they also took certain things from Ropshitz, like Naginim that they have, certain things from Ropshitz. So that's what they have. And he became Rebbe, and his group was basically the biggest one in Galicia. Shina was more in other places towards Hungary and stuff like that, but the Baba was considered the biggest one in the Galicia before the war. Now today, just like in Klausenberg, there's two, Baba, there's two, in both of them in Borough Park. One of them, the largest one, is probably a large Hasidus. I'm sure they have more than 1,000 families. The second one is absolutely a middle-sized Hasidus and may have gotten into the large category. Not really sure. There may be 1,000 families all over the world in the second one. First one, there's certainly 1,000 families all over. So that's that. So that's what's in Sans today. There were other Sans of children that they just, disappeared basically. This is actually the story of Hasidic history when it comes to World War II. We could, if I was to talk about all the groups that existed before World War II and no longer today, we'd have to take hours and hours to discuss that. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is Satmar. Satmar is probably the largest Hasidus in the world. Okay, Satmar goes back to the Moshe of Eel, Moshe Teitelbaum of Eel. He was a common of Lublin. His son-in-law, Arya Leibish of Brigo, took him to Lublin, to his Rebbe, and he became a Chassid. There's a whole story about it that his grandson, Zalman Leib of Sighet, tells about that. Now, the Zalman Leib of Sighet was a Sanza Chassid. He went to Tzans. His son, Hanan Yom Tov Lipa, I don't remember if he went to Tzans, but I believe he went to Chernov. And his son was Rabbi Yoel of Satmar. He's a very famous Satmar. He died in 79, I believe it was. And then his nephew, Moshe, who was his brother's son, took over. And right now, after he died, his two sons, one is Adan, who's in Kriyas Yoel, which is near Monroe, New York. It's a couple hours north of New York City. And the other one, Zalman Leib, is Rebit in Williamsburg. Together, there's definitely mega Hasidus. They've been split. It's quite possible that one or both of them also are still on their own mega Hasidus, but certainly both of them are large Hasiduses, and they may by them certainly together. And together, they're certainly mega Hasiduses. The influence of Satmar cannot be overestimated in the war after war years. Many of the communities that even aren't Satmar were very strongly influenced by him. So that while Satmar is a group by itself, but there's a lot of groups that were influenced by him and followed his lead on all kinds of issues. For example, the strong anti-Zionist movements all follow his lead. Okay. Now, let me just take a break for 1 minute. See if there's any questions, and then we'll do the last three and we'll wrap it up for the night. Okay, any questions, Dan, Veronica? Okay, let me take a look at it. Okay. Sharon Lee asks, can you explain the meaning of when the Messiah comes, we will all worship in one accord? Okay, one accord means is we all worship the same God together. So when Mashiach comes, the center of worship will be in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And what people don't really know is in the Second Temple time for certain, we know that non-Jews also brought sacrifices in the temple. There's an oilless sacrifice which the non-Jews are allowed to bring. They would bring to the temple. And so when Mashiach comes, the center of worship will be in Jerusalem, and everybody will together worship Hashem. the same God, the God of Israel. And they will worship him either praying towards Jerusalem or going to Jerusalem itself to bring sacrifices and praying in Jerusalem itself. That's what that means. That's what we're looking forward to, is that, while today everybody follows their own God, they follow their own way. Nobody, in the time to come, when Mashiach comes, everybody will be following Hashem. All right? Any more questions? And we'll continue the last three that I have here to talk about. Two of the three are somewhat small, but they are important in the respect that they gathered. And the third one is somewhat larger. Okay, so let's go first. The first one, talk about Skulen. The first Skulen Rebbe was Eliezer Zisha, and he lived in Romania under the communists, and he was a rabbi there, and he gathered people who were around him. He was rescued from under the communists in Romania. The late Lubavitch Rebbe's father-in-law, I believe, was involved with it, getting him out. And he came to America. And unlike other Hasidic rabbis who came to America, he did not start institutions like yeshivas. He had one institution that he put all of his strength in, and that was an institute called Chasidic, named after his father. And it was a institution for orphans. Many people have been orphaned after the war. And so it was a place for a school where you could raise orphans. And that was his whole emphasis. And so he lived in Crown Heights, and then eventually moved to Borough Park. And that was his whole, what he did, his whole thing, what he did. And eventually people came to him, saw him for a great time. Now he was a Talmud from one of the Rabbis from the Rizhina dynasty. And so a lot of his stuff, as far as, he himself didn't like, as a Rebbe from Rizhin, a lot of the Rizhin things he had was singing, and a lot of the customs came from Rizhin itself. In America, he was known for a lot of things besides that, his tefillas. There's actually a cipher of his Torah's teachings that I have. And I saw him once, a number of years ago. He would pray when he would say the Kriya Shema. It would take him three quarters of an hour to say it. Very much, very well known for that. When he died, his son Yisroel Avrum took over, who also had been in Romania and came out with him. And when Yisroel Avrum died, then the sons of his, who were a number of them, became Rabbis in different places. The oldest son became Rabbi in Borough Park, but he died like about 5 years afterwards. So his son is there, a grandson, but the other sons are in different places. One in Jerusalem, I think one's in Lakewood, I think one's in Muncie, one's in Williamsburg. I'm not really sure what they are. All together, I think if you take all of them together, they probably make it into a medium-sized Hasidus. Okay, each one individually, I don't know if anyone individually goes over that boundary from small to medium, but certainly I think altogether they probably make it into the medium-sized Hasidus. So that's Skulen, important because, well, it's not a very large group. It's a group that has a lot of respect because of the founder of the group. The next group is Peshvorsk. Peshvorsk is in Antwerp, Belgium. He's basically, as far as I know, the only Rebbe who is in Belgium. Now, there are synagogues, shuls, for different other Hasidus in Belgium, but he's the only Rebbe who's there, as far as I know. The founder of the group was Reb Itzchak of Peshvorsk. Reb Itzchak himself was descended from Rebbe Melech Muzhensk, but in Europe, before the war, he was a Talmud of one of the descendants of the Shinovidov, the Rebbe in Reuven Chernov, who was, I think, the Shinovidov's son or grandson, I can't remember. It's not really important. There's really no Chernov. I mean, there's a Chernov Rebbe now, but he doesn't really have Hasidim. So he was a Talmud of Chernov in Europe, who had a lot of Hasidim, but it was basically wiped out with the war. And so Rabbi Itzchak was Rebbe in Belgium, in Antwerp. And when he died, his son-in-law took over, and then his son-in-law died, and I think his son took over. I think that's who's there now. I can't really remember. I have a lot of friends who live in Antwerp, and he's a very well-known, very respected. He's basically there. I know he has a shul in Williamsburg, but it's pretty small there. I assume it's probably a middle-sized Chassidus based on that. I don't know if it's really a large class Chassidus, but in Antwerp, a lot of people go to him because he's basically the main Rebbe that's there. The final one that I want to talk about, some people may know of, it's called Toldos Aaron. The old Toldos Aaron Rebbe died a number of years ago. I think it's probably about 10 or 15. No, 1 second, it's got to be more than that. I think the old Toldos Aaron Rebbe died probably 20, 25 years ago. I'll tell you in a minute how I know that. Now, the old Toldos Aaron Rebbe, Yitzchak, was the son-in-law of Ananrot. Ananrot is the founder of basically this line. He was a Talmud from the Bluzhevet Rebbe, who was a descendant of Tzvi Elamayach of Dinov. Bluzhev was a Dinov, he was a member there. He came to Israel, and when he came there, he gathered together a Chabira. Chabira is not a Chassidus. Chabira is a group of Hasidim. They came together to serve Hashem, essentially. They came together to serve Hashem, to daven and pray together and learn together in order to serve Hashem themselves in Jerusalem. Dressed in Jerusalem, Levish and everything, Jerusalem garments and everything like that. Now, he wrote a number of works. There are 3 that are very important. I have them and have learned them very much a number of times. First one's called Shulman. That is a work that talks about basically faith and trust in Hashem and things related to that. Very common work. It's basically the basic faith, the basic work of his. Another work that he wrote is called Shulchan Aruch, the Holy Table, and that's all about eating with holiness. And talks a little about chabas also, but it's about things involved with eating in holiness. And the third one's called Toharis HaKodesh, the Holy Purity, and that's about being pure in different instances of purity and also in repentance. His son-in-law, when he died, basically took over. He had sons who have small groups. They're called Shomer Minam Rabbis, and they're basically small groups. I think all of them together are still small. I don't think they even make it into the middle size. Toldos Aaron was very important because Toldos Aaron, when he was alive, I believe it had reached to the size of being a large Chassidus. Okay? Meaning that they had probably 1,000 families. Now, when the Toldos Aaron Rebbe died, he had 2 sons. His younger son, who was living in New York at the time, in Monsey, came back and he became the Rebbe of Toldos Aaron. Okay? His older brother became Rebbe in the group he called Toldos Avim Yitzchak, after his father's name was Avim Yitzchak. Now, the reason why the second son was taken over is because the older son, his father had sent him to Vishnitz under Chaim Meyer from Vishnitz, and then when Chaim Meyer died, he remained a Talmud from Rabbi Yidel Jikova, who was descended from one of the Visions and Rabbis, and his group was basically, he mixed together Visions and Jikov. Jikov comes from Ropshitz, a very, very big tzaddik. I have some things of his. He brought it together, and he was the Rebbe of the Rebbe from Toldos Aaron Yitzchak. And because he didn't do things the same as his father did, Toldos Aaron, he did a lot of things from Visions. Just as an aside, there was a small Rebbe in Yerushalayim, Menachem Mondlik. It's called the Kosev Yerushalayim Rebbe, who was also a Talmud of Rabbi Yidela, and his children married actually children from the Toldos Aaron Yitzchak Rebbe. I was very close with him at some time. When I traveled, I used to have to do with him. He's also followed that the Visions Jacob there. So because of that, the majority of Hasidim in Toldus Aden did not want to follow the older son. They followed the younger son, Toldus Aden. Now, my son in Jerusalem, his father-in-law is from Toldus Aden. And he was very close with the Toldus Aden Rebbe today, which means that he must have come to Rebbe at least 20 years ago, because my son got married almost 20 years ago. I remember that. So it's got to be over 20 years. Time passes very far when you get old, so it's very quick when you get old. Just as an interesting aside, my son was very, very close, is very, very close with the Toldus Aden Rebbe himself. And when he got married, we came from America, so none of our family was here. So, during the 7 days, you make, a meal every single day for whatever. And on Shabbos, the day meal, instead of going to my daughter-in-law's father, the Toldus Aden Rebbe made the meal for the Chusn and Kala, for the couple that just got married, in his house. So we made the Sheva Bruchas, in what's called Sheva Bruchas, in his house. The Toldus Aden Rebbe did it. So we have a very close relationship with that. Interesting, where I daven during the week, during Shabbos, basically, and during the week also I have a meeting there. One of his sons is married to the granddaughter of the Toldus Aden Rebbe, and the other son is married to the granddaughter of the Toldus Aden Yitzchak Rebbe. Two brothers married to two brothers' grandchildren. Very interesting. Again, people intermarry, so that is. So basically, that's it. We've come to the end. As I said, these two together are certainly large, and I think Toldus Aden for itself is certainly a large Chassidus. Toldus Aden Yitzchak, I don't know if it's crossed the boundary of being a large Chassidus yet. It's certain. Again, all these things are what is today, but in the future, certainly within a certain amount of time, these will become large Chassiduses themselves and move up into other things. Or I'll just have to move the numbers up from 10,000 being mega Chassidus to 25,000 families being mega Chassidus, and 1,000 to maybe 5,000. Because remember, if you look at things, each generation, I'll take myself as an example. I have somewhere right now between 15 and 20 grandchildren. So we're talking about, in a period of time of, 40 years, a generation, two people have now become almost 20 people. Okay. So you can imagine with that type of growth, and my family is actually on the smaller side. It's not on the larger side for various reasons. Some children didn't have trouble, children, whatever, but so I'm actually on the smaller side as far as people having grandchildren. Most people have, certainly almost twice as much as I have, because they, first of all, may have had more children, and their children have had more children than my children have, because of various reasons, never can tell. So, the growth rate is not, geometric, it's exponential. And because of that, within a generation or so, when each class, has like 40, 50, 60 boys, these are going to become, every class graduates, they become 60 more Hasidic families when they get married, 60 more Hasidic families. So within 10 years, you've already added a minimum of 600 families. And then they have children, so another generation, you have now added 600 people are going to have, let's say each one has 3 or 4 boys each. Okay, so now you've added 2,500 more families, and it just grows in each generation. Every 20 years, it grows at just such a large amount like that. So these numbers are only going to go up, not down. Okay, basically building up from what it was. So right now I'm using these calculations, but the truth of the matter, in the future, they're going to be much larger, and these numbers are what I'm talking about now are not going to be, in 10 years, they're not going to be relevant anymore, because groups that were small, that I would have to call them large, really, I would, or small that I would have to call them medium, I'd have to still call them small, because medium, I'm going to have to increase that amount to over 100, say 100 to 500. And those that were medium, that when expanded to being large, I'd have to keep them again medium, because the large would have to expand up, not from 1,000 families, maybe 4,000, 5,000 families, and et cetera like that. Because just that's what happens as groups grow. Okay, but these are the numbers I talked about now, and I think it'll probably stay pretty consistent. I don't think in relationship to one to another, there's going to be much of a change with it. Maybe some of these smaller groups will become by themselves, these subgroups, which now are considered small, like Ziddishov Command, one of these that are small groups might actually some of these on their own level. Some of these actually might move from small to medium size by themselves. So again, maybe if I give this over again in 20 or 30 years, God willing, I should be around for that long, I might have to change my numberings of it. But that's basically what it is. So we basically covered right now 95+% of the Hasidim that are in the world. Now, there's a sizable amount of people who call themselves Hasidim that don't belong to any Rabbis or like that. I don't really particularly consider them in it. If I would be including them in it, the non-associated Hasidim who call them Hasidim but really don't have Rabbis, then we're talking about probably 85% of what's out there. Okay, but that's what it is. These are all groups. Overwhelming majority of these groups' views of the modern world, internet is very negative. That's why you will have almost very little exposure to them as Noahides. But again, the importance of this is, first of all, you will occasionally find people like me who belongs to non-Lubavitch, non-Breslov. So it's always important to know what it's like, what the Hasidic world is like, because I am more representative of the Hasidic world than either Breslov or Lubavitch is. The Lubavitch itself, if you take everything in it, basically probably caps out between 10 and 15% of the Hasidic world. And Breslov is less than that. So, the overwhelming majority of the Hasidic world is much different from what you're exposed to. That's just the way it is. So it's important to knowing what really the Hasidic world looks like. And then from that, you can, extrapolate the non-Hasidic world, the Haredi world, the non-Hasidic world, what it looks like and how, much it's, you're not exposed to what it looks like. And it's important to know it. You come to a place and you say, oh, I think I want to go into this synagogue. I want to see what a ger, synagogue looks like. By the way, the ger is not ger as in somebody who's a convert. Ger is because the city they came from is Gura Kalwari, which was a suburb of Warsaw. The Polish name is Gura Kalwari, and they call themselves, usually, so a lot of times it pronounce it Gur, but other people outside pronounce it ger. I don't know why. But, if you go into a place like that and, the reaction you're going to be, will be because they will look at you as part of a modern world that they reject. So it's very hard. And especially because there's other reasons which we'll talk about as to why it's going to be difficult for you to go into the Haredi world. Because of the way the Noahide movement is today, we'll talk about some of those issues as we go on. Why certain things are problems as far in that part of the world. In other parts of the religious Jewish world, what's going on. But basically, that's what this is all about. I want you to know what the Hasidic world is. It's a significant part of Orthodoxy, and numerically, it's becoming a larger and larger part of Orthodoxy. The Haredim are the people who have most children. So even though there's a lot of modern Orthodox as a percentage of Orthodox is getting smaller and smaller. The Haredim is becoming larger and larger. There's very small fall away. There's a lot of people who join it. So that is basically it. If there are any questions, I will entertain them now. Otherwise, what I will do is I will shut off the recording, and Dan will shut off the recording. And those people who have come here to the Zoom session, we can, talk together for a little while. I noticed, Dan, that our session here takes the usual 2 hours or more. Yeah. If you have to you could shut off, since there's no question, shut off the YouTube and, the Facebook, and then just keep it going, and Rana could shut us off afterwards after we finish talking. Yeah. But again, the reason why this takes so much longer is because, we do.
Wow, what a session, folks.
We do get more questions.
We'll wrap it up for today.
I do try to give
Hasidus.
My nature is usually to give very short
today,
answers. Like ask me a question on
so that's a
Jewish
good
law
explanation,
as far as Noahide. I'll give you a very short answer. But when it comes to certain issues that you ask questions, I try and give as full an answer as possible.
Useful and
so
enjoyable.
You get
I know that
a much better feel
going to be a lot more Noahide
all the
relevant
issues
and have
involved
a
in
lot
the
more
things that we're
teaching
talking about,
that
and how they relate specifically
we can
to
learn from.
what we're talking about Noahide Path.
Hopefully
Those
you've
things
enjoyed
that can
his
help you along that
history.
way. Again, before we shut up, I want to remind you that the
just
next
any place.
unit we're going to be is Noahide
keep
and
an eye out
Tanakh,
for our
Torah.
upcoming post next month. Will probably be
It's
the
going to
end
be
of
divided into
February.
basically two parts.
So
The first
until then,
one
have
is going to be Noahide's
wonderful day,
and
everybody.
the Tanakh itself,
Bye for
where
now.
we're going to dispel a lot of the misunderstandings that